My next guest is a member of the Labor Department of a major law firm in Cleveland called Benish, Freelander, Copeland, and Aronoff. He's a partner in the firm's labor and employment practice. He's been a member of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission since, I think, May 2002 or 2002 or so. Please welcome to the program, Peter Kirsanow. Peter!
Very great to be with you again.
Great to hear from you, too. Peter, for people who don't know how you ended up on the Civil Rights Commission, I know that Bush appointed you, but the chairwoman, Mary Frances Berry, tried to stop you. Tell us about that story again.
Well, that's exactly right. President Bush appointed me in November of, actually early December of 2001, but the majority on the Civil Rights Commission that consisted of liberals, especially the chairperson, told Bush that it would take federal marshals to seat me, and the reason for that, obviously, is because I didn't necessarily conform to their outlook on civil rights. And so we had to litigate the matter. The Justice Department did, all the way up to the Supreme Court before I was finally seated, as you indicated, in May of 2002.
Now, Peter, Mary Frances Berry is black. You're black. Do you believe had Bush appointed Peter Kirsanow, who was a non-black person, a white person, that she would have said it would take federal marshals to seat that person?
Unlikely, because Bush had appointed a couple of other Republicans to the commission, a few months before he appointed me, two very fine commissioners, white females, and there wasn't the same brouhaha. I think that when you, and you know this better than anybody, Larry, when you escape the plantation, they come after you big time.
Tell me about it. Now, Peter, another thing that you did on the Civil Rights Commission is you researched the issue of immigration, specifically illegal immigration, and the impact, especially on people who are unskilled living in the inner city. And I believe you told me that the liberals on the board, those in the middle, and the conservatives all agreed that the impact of illegal immigration was hurtful, harmful to people living in the inner city, especially unskilled black and brown workers.
Yeah, and the evidence is uncontrovertible. All of our witnesses, and we had several panels, it was an all-day hearing, of witnesses who spanned the ideological spectrum. And regardless of whether or not they were from the left or from the right, they all agreed at the end, although they may have had some slight differences with respect to the impact or the depth of the impact, they all agreed that the impact of illegal immigration was a decidedly negative one on the black community. With respect to wages and employment levels. In fact, when you did the calculation, did the math, and I don't remember which witness did this, but it's in our report, and that was from a few years ago, 40% of the 18-point decline in black labor force participation that occurred over a couple of decades was attributable to illegal immigration. George Borjas of Harvard, with whom I have testified before the Senate subcommittee on immigration and the national interest, has come up with similar stats, and there are a lot of other scholars who've done so. I think the evidence is pretty irrefutable that it has a decidedly negative impact, and it's profound. We're talking about, when you do, as I said, you do the math, if it's an 18-point decline, then you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 900,000 to 1 million black jobs that have been lost due to competition from illegal immigration. In the traditional segments of the economy where blacks for a long time traditionally have dominated, such as agriculture, construction, service industry, and so forth. So that's something that you don't hear about quite that often, but for all the open borders advocates, we have to be asked, do you give precedent or preference to foreigners over Americans when it comes to economic prospects?
Peter Kirsanow is my guest. He's a member of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. Peter, you wrote a letter to your congresswoman, who at the time I believe was the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Marcia Fudge, compiling a very long letter with all this data, and you wanted a meeting. What happened?
Well, and you've been very good about this, Larry, pointing this out. We wrote, meaning my assistant and I, who followed up on this for me, we wrote several letters to the Congressional Black Caucus citing some of the statistics that I've just given you, that it's had a deleterious impact on the black community, they are the ones who call themselves, they're the self-styled Congressional Black Caucus. They call themselves that. So I thought they might have an interest in things that had an adverse consequence on the black community, and they should be doing something about it. But despite the fact that we sent them all this information, we had repeated letters that went to them, and my assistant would regularly, I think it was on a weekly basis, follow up with them to see what they were going to do. We wanted a meeting, or at least to provide them with any additional information that they needed in order to correct this problem, and all we heard were crickets. And then on top of that, it's bad enough that there's this silence with respect to the adverse impact on black wage and employment levels, but the impact on all Americans, but also, again, it most profoundly impacts, as they say, communities of color, is the criminal effect, the criminal rates of illegal immigrants, which are far above that of lawful U.S. residents, despite the fact that you see experts running out there very quickly every time there's a high-profile murder by an illegal immigrant or some other type of crime, saying that illegal immigrants don't commit crimes at any greater rate than lawful residents, and that's profoundly false. I keep using that term, but the fact of the matter is it is something that is extraordinary, and the difference is not by just a percentage point here or there. We're talking about significant differences with respect to crime rates, and then significant problems with respect to the number of jobs that have been taken that had traditionally been held by members of the black community, particularly black men, as a result of massive influx of illegal immigrants.
Peter Kirsanow, I just read a column by Ruben Navarrete who said the opposite of what you said. He says that legal immigrants and illegal immigrants are much less likely to commit crime than Native Americans, than Americans.
Yep, Larry, I've been confronting this for quite some time, and that's one of the bases that they steal. Here's what they do. They will take and conflate legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. It is true, based on all the data we see, that legal immigrants actually commit crimes at a lower rate than other Americans' lawful residents. Mm-hmm. That is not true for illegal immigrants, but what they do is they aggregate both of them so as to lower the overall rate. The fact is that it is extraordinarily difficult, Larry, for reasons that you can easily divine, that the various organs of government do not collect specific data with respect to illegal immigrants, except in a couple of instances, and one or two states do it. But on the Civil Rights Commission, we have looked at it, and we've aggregated the data. And more importantly, one of the best scholars on this, John Lott, has aggregated the data. And what we have found is that it's a significant difference. Illegal immigrants commit crimes at a far higher rate than lawful residents, and that's after you correct for a couple of things, Larry. First,
Peter, I'm going to ask you to hold on because I want to ask you about the crime committed by illegals, and I also want to ask you why is it that people like Marcia Fudge and Maxine Waters don't care?
You're listening to The Larry Elder Show.
Peter Kirsanow is my guest. He contributes regularly to the National Review. His articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Times. He's also the author of a novel called Target Omega. Didn't you write a sequel to the novel too, Peter?
Yeah, I did. The Target Omega has come out in paperback, and Second Strike has come out in hard copy, and next year there'll be a third novel coming out that I'm just finishing up right now.
So who's going to play the protagonist in the movie? And please don't tell me Samuel L. Jackson. I can't take it.
Well, there have been a number of fans who've emailed me that Dwayne Johnson should play the protagonist, but he really doesn't fit. There's another character that he does fit, but look, when the producers call me, I'll let them cast anybody as long as they pay me.
Yeah, well, if Dwayne Johnson attaches himself to it, it gets made. He's the biggest star, I think, in Hollywood right now. All right, Peter, you were telling us about the cost of illegal immigration. During the break, I'm looking at a piece on NPR. Illegal immigration does not increase violent crime. 4 studies show, and it goes over all these studies, and they looked at both violent crime committed by illegals and nonviolent crime committed by illegals, and they claim that illegals commit less violent crime and less nonviolent crime compared to legal residents of the country. Your reaction?
That is completely and utterly false. Let me repeat for your listeners, remember this, and remember this hard. Whenever you hear those kinds of stats, they are stealing several bases, and they are lying to you for political and other reasons, ideological reasons. Here are the facts. First, extreme extremely difficult to get reliable data, but it can be done. And there's a reason why it's difficult. It's because most administrations and most organs of government don't want you to have that data. Second, whenever you're talking about illegal immigrant crime data, keep in mind several things. First, they steal bases by just completely not counting the millions of crimes committed by illegal aliens that consist of identity theft and all the other things necessary to remain in this country if you are illegal. In addition to that, crossing the border itself is a crime, but they subtract that out. And then all of the other crimes that apparently they don't think are so important, such as the illegal appropriation of billions of dollars in public benefits to which illegal aliens are not entitled. Put all that aside. The truth of the matter is, even when you talk about quote-unquote serious crimes, illegal aliens commit more serious crimes at a higher rate and more crimes in the aggregate than lawful residents do. I'll cite for you just one study, and when I do cite this one study, which is the best study on this, keep in mind three things that probably cause every study to undercount the true crime rate among illegal immigrants.
Peter, 60 seconds. Go ahead.
First, as I said, they will conflate immigration, legal immigration, and illegal immigration. Number two is victims who are illegal immigrants are less likely to report crimes because they fear the consequences of appearing in court or dealing with law enforcement. Third, the witnesses to illegal immigrant crime are less likely to report it, less likely to show up in court because they're afraid of the consequences. Liberals always bring these things up when they justify sanctuary cities. In fact, it is true they report crimes at a lower rate. But with respect to crime rates, John Lott and others have shown that illegal immigrants commit crimes not at 5% or 10% greater rate, but with respect to serious crimes at 140% greater rate, with respect to all crimes in the aggregate up to 250% more. And it's not jaywalking we're talking about. In New York, 27% of all incarcerated illegal aliens are incarcerated for murder, not jaywalking. We're talking about serious crimes. We're talking about a massive amount of crimes. But remember, most of the data you see has already been subtracting out millions of other crimes that they simply grant to illegal immigrants but don't grant to anybody else.
Peter Kirsanow, we're going to have to leave it there. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Larry.
My pleasure.